2, clear takeoff, left hand. Takeoff left, this is speed 1. Left land, swim west, copy. Speed 1. Crossing 2-1. Crossing at 2-4 is
Hello and welcome to the Blueskies Podcast. I'm PR Ganapati, your host.
Just 70, Roger, report type southeast, connection, speed 4, Sumit right, and field selected.
It is my great pleasure today to host a legendary officer of the Indian Air Force. I know a lot of you listeners have been asking me to interview him, Air Marshal Sumit Mukherji. He was commissioned into the Air Force in the fighter stream in 1972. He was at the top of his course, winning several trophies, and has had a long and distinguished career. He is probably the only officer I know of who has at some point or the other had under his command every type of MiG aircraft in the Indian Air Force fleet, starting from the MiG-21, MiG-23, MiG-25, MiG-27 and MiG-29. Air Marshal Mukherji was awarded a Shaurya Chakra, Vishish Seva Medal and then a Param Vishish Seva Medal. His last position was as the Commander-in-Chief of Southern Air Command. Welcome to the program, sir. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you, Ganesh. An absolute privilege to be here with you on the podcast. I've been an avid listener and follower of your podcasts, and there have been some wonderful and very, very prominent people that have featured in your podcast, and I'm really privileged to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So that's so nice of you to say, and the privilege and honor is completely ours to have you here. So, sir, as we start off with all our guests, we love to get to know them better. So I'd just love to know where you grew up, what was your family background like, and what was the motivation and initial journey of joining the Air Force, your journey as a cadet where you won all those medals and awards to top your course?
Right, Ganesh, I'm from a service family. My father in the Army Medical Corps.
Fascinating. Uh-huh.
And because we were moving around, he put me into a boarding school, and I've done most of my schooling in Sherwood College, Nainital. We have a few luminaries from our school, people like Sam Manekshaw, Amitabh Bachchan, Michael McMahon, Air Marshal Michael McMahon.
Of course.
You should get him
Yes,
on this.
I know him very well, and we're definitely going to try and get him someday.
Right. So I belong in that family, and hopefully I've done some justice to them. So that's where most of all my schooling was from, and from that's where I joined the NDA.
Okay. And did you join as an Air Force cadet or an Army cadet?
I must tell you this strange thing. At my farewell speech when I retired from Southern Air Command as the CNC, I started my farewell speech to the officers by saying that, I joined this service by mistake, the Air Force by mistake. So there was this hushed silence, and, everybody had this horrified look on their face as to the CNC who served almost 40 years, now leaving the next morning, and he's saying that he joined this Air Force by mistake. It's like that, Ganesh. Actually, I wanted to join the Navy as a fleet air arm pilot.
Oh, wow.
Actually, I was very keen to fly on off deck, and I applied for the NDA, and I went for this SSB, and having done the SSB, went for the medical. I flunked my medical.
Wow.
For eyesight.
Oh my.
Night vision. And I came back home, and then a little later I get a call for PABT in Dehradun, and I went for the PABT separately because Air Force was my second choice. And I think I love that PABT because they told me I've done quite well. And they sent me for medical to CME in
Right.
Delhi. CME in Delhi, they had us all lined up, all these young school kids who had come for their medical after the SSB. And there was this young flight lieutenant who was reading out the list, the names on that list. And when he came to me, he says, "You've already done a medical, I see, I noticed." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You failed your eye test, night vision?" I said, "Yes." So he said, "Then why have you come here? This is an Air Force medical." So I said, "I don't know."
Right.
They sent me. So he took me aside and he told the warrant officer or sergeant, I don't remember now. He said, "Take him away, take him to the eye test. We don't want to waste time with this character. And let the others go through the routine medical, the height, weight, chest, and it starts from there really." And he said, "Put him through the eye test. If he fails, just let him go because we don't want to waste our time on already failed the test." I did the medical, and the Air Force doctor found my eyesight was perfect. The night vision was perfect.
Wow.
And they cleared me and they gave me a form to say that this is to appeal to the Navy, to say that I am found fit by the Air Force, so I am actually fit for the Navy. And since the rest of the medical was already done, I didn't need to do the rest. I was going home in a bus, and I tore up that form and I threw it away in the bus, in the closest dustbin I could find. And I went home. So when the call really came to NDA, it came as an Air Force cadet, and that's how it is.
Wow. That is an amazing story, and I guess the Navy's losses, the Air Force's gain. It's so wonderful to hear.
Well, I'm not unhappy about it, and I think I've enjoyed myself in the Air Force.
Lovely. So what aircraft did you fly during your training stage, and any memorable experiences or sorties from that?
I've gone through the same routine that the others have gone through. The HT2 in the initial stage, the Harvard or the T6 Texan really. We had a couple of Harvards in AFA, and then of course Vampires in the fighter training wing. Incidentally, our course, 107 pilots course, is the first course at the Air Force Academy in Dundigal.
Oh, wow. Oh.
So the Harvards moved from Jodhpur into Dundigal, and 107 course was the first course, and we did the inauguration parade of that academy, and then got it going. The first flying that started, the training flying that started, was done in 107 course.
Was the infrastructure fairly basic at that time, or was it just up and coming?
Well, I'm not sure whether you've seen AFA. I'm sure you have. But what we had there was one building, which was the ATC building, which is still there today, called the Seikho Block. There were two runways. There was one runway, sorry, not two runways like today, but you had only one runway. You had 6 hangars and a tarmac. And you had one cadet's mess, one commandant's house, and about 8 or 12 houses for the officers. Maybe 12 or maybe 16, I'm not sure. 4 blocks, or maybe 16 houses for the officers. That was the entire infrastructure of AFA at that time. There was a lake, and there was just open ground all around. The airmen side, I'm not too certain how much there was, but there was very little. We were not going that side at all. And we trudged on cycle to work and back, which they're even doing today. But that was it. There was nothing else at AFA. Today, of course, it's a beautiful academy to look at. But we were the guys. We were actually the guys who front rolled along the roads and planted the trees. So when you see the gul mohors as you come from the main gate to the main Seikho building, the gul mohors have been planted by
107th course. Okay. And after FTW, you went to Hunters, MiG straight away. What was the journey like?
Yes. After commissioning at Hakimpet, we all went to OTU. That time it was OTU in Jamnagar. And thereafter, after 6 months, into MiGs.
Okay.
But at AFA and at Hakimpet, we had, I must take this opportunity to tell you, that at Hakimpet, actually, we were the 1971 batch, starting from July through December. And our commissioning date was planned on the 3rd or 4th of December, sometime then, of 1971, the day the war started. So you would understand that as the war clouds were building up and
all the instructors went off to the squadrons.
They had to go off, and they went sometime in October, really, after having finished most of our flying. So a whole lot of us were actually more or less completed our flying, and they went off to the war. And after the war, around the 16th or 18th of December, most of them came back. And that's how it was. And so our commissioning got delayed into January.
Right.
And we were commissioned on the 22nd of January 1972 because of the war. And we moved in thereafter into OT.
Sir, I have to ask you, when these instructors came back with their war experience, you must have mobbed them for stories. And what was the mood like in the crew room and sitting around listening to them describe it?
Well, the mood actually started before that. I must also tell you, Ganesh, I thought our course, in particular, had a very good grooming. We had a very, very sound combat grooming, I would say. Because right from the Harvard stage or the Texan stage in the AFA, we had Roy Massey, Sukrut Raj, C.D. Chandrasekhar, Michael McMahon, and all these officers were our instructors, and they would make us fly the way fighter pilots fly in the cockpit. The straps loose after takeoff, shoulder harness loose. Look around for bogies and stuff like that. So our orientation for flying fighters was very sound and strong. And in Hakimpet, as the war situation became more prominent and the instructors knew they would be going shortly, they started doing this training for war. And we were not allowed to log it, but I have flown so many sorties with my instructor. My instructor was A.J. Singh, Flight Lieutenant A.J. Singh that time, who became my commanding officer later on in MiG-25s, Wing Commander A.J. Singh. And so I've flown a lot with A.J. Singh in the trainer, Vampire trainer, and I've done 1 versus 1 and 2 versus 2 and 2 versus 1 as a cadet. And so that's why I'm telling you, our grooming in the Air Force was very strong. And we got this orientation of fighter and combat orientation from a very early stage. And when the instructors, while they were away and the war started, since we were idle at the time, we had a couple of staff pilots who hadn't gone to war, and they were completing the flying of the guys who hadn't caught up as yet. The rest of us had set up this huge map in our crew room, and we were putting these pins, and we were listening. We were manning 3 radios 24/7. The All India Radio, the BBC, and the Voice of America. So we were following the war and there were 3 guys, and we were doing this watch right through the night, and everything was being logged and the data collected, and we were putting these drawing pins and movements of units and stuff like that, whether it was Army, whether it was Air Force, and whenever we heard of someone being shot down, the aircraft, the pilot, in case the name came. So we had a pretty decent log of the war as we heard it on radio, 24/7 from maybe a week before the war started right through till a week after the war.
Amazing. And were you all kind of, really frustrated that you were just a few years too late, and if you'd been born a few years earlier, you would have actually been taking part?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And it's always, left that little longing, that we were not there.
And so after OTU, where did you go for your MiG conversions?
We went briefly into Chandigarh 45 squadron, but they already had 12 guys there, and 9 of us joined in maybe 2 weeks later, and they didn't have place for us. At that time, Squadron Leader Tipnis used to be the flight commander of 45 Squadron, the later Air Chief. And so we were sent off to 28th Squadron in Tezpur. Recently bloodied in war, and with Wing Commander Bishnoi, VRC, and who was the commanding officer of the squadron for a short while. And then after, of course, your father Wing Commander, then Ramachandran took over. And so I served with him for I think almost a year in 28th Squadron as a pilot officer.
Amazing.
So that's where my initial MiG training was done. And that's my starting point on the MiG-29.
Okay, great. So, 28th Squadron, soon after the war, they'd done all those things about cratering the runway and then, of course, hitting the governor's house. So the squadron must have been full of these fascinating stories, which you all must have been, soaking
Absolutely.
up in the crew room. What was it like?
Yes. Our story started from Hakimpet, like you asked. When they came back, we were all agog. We were listening to stories from these instructors of ours. And so we heard a lot of stories from them. Then when we went to OTU, we had Pete Wilson, Group Captain Pete Wilson as the station commander. And Don Conquest was the CEO of the OTU.
Amazing.
And the whole crowd, and Air Marshal, later Air Marshal, and that time Group Captain Mini Bawa was the chief instructor, ATW, Armament Training Wing. So you can understand Jaisalmer and the Longewala battle and all these hunters and all these pilots who are fresh out of Longewala and the strikes and all that they've done. The hunter which Cookie Suresh flew and in his pull-out he hit the ground. Yes, that was lying there. It was there outside the hangar. You could see the tail all crunched up, and that was a very narrow escape he must have had. And it was a fantastic sight and a fantastic environment. And we were so charged up at that time. The instructors were so charged up. So you can understand the sort of grooming that we've had in our initial stages as cadets, and into the initial stages of our flying of fighter airplanes.
Amazing.
In 28th Squadron with that time Wing Commander Bishnoi, he was going around giving presentations. So I've always been a little good with my hands and my artwork and stuff like that. So I would be making a lot of maps and charts and writing stuff with my handwriting, writing stuff on these viewfoils those days.
Overhead projector. Wow.
So he would carry me along and as the pointer man, and moving the slides around and stuff.
Fascinating.
So I attended a lot of briefings given by him post the war. And so it was a great learning experience for all of us.
I presume you've seen the famous tourist map of Dhaka that he was handed when he went on that mission. It must have been a prized possession of the squadron.
Absolutely. More of the stories would come out over the drinks. So it was really good, really wonderful to hear the war stories from all of the pilots.
Truly a just war in the sense that we were fighting for the good cause, and we treated ourselves in really in a very honorable way. Wonderful, sir. So what was the rest of your career like after that, leading up to say, I don't know, which of the after the 21, which other type of MiG did you first fly?
I was from 28 actually. I went to 3 Squadron Pathankot, where I was there for 4 years, a long stint. And there into FIS, and then the 2 years in AFA as an instructor, and from there back to MiG-21's 8th Squadron in Tezpur, back to Tezpur, and just a 1 year tenure, because then the MiG-25s came in, and I was the first Indian, as they called me, to join 102 Squadron. That time it was 102 operational unit, it was not a squadron. So they baptized me with Technicky Spirit, which I don't know whether you're aware that you use this alcohol to cool the avionics base of all these Russian aircraft, most of the aircraft. MiG-25 uses a whole lot of it. So this alcohol was always available to everyone virtually, and so I was baptized by drinking a cap full of 98 proof.
Holy cow!
Technici spirit. It was that's technician spirit, they call it. It was baptism by fire.
Like your airport diving southeast, for Sumit
So you were jumping too far ahead, so I have to stop you and pull you back. You had a fascinating emergency when you were an instructor, so just tell us that in great detail. Just want to hear about that whole thing, that whole experience.
Yes, it happened in 1980, Ganesh. I was flying with this cadet, and we were doing an instrument flying sortie or something which didn't involve too much of maneuvering, as I recollect. And
which aircraft were you in?
This was on the Kiran,
okay.
Mark 1. We were, because of the profile that we were flying over Hyderabad and Secunderabad. We were over the thick of town. All the other sectors on that day were occupied by the other aircraft. And so we were sent off to this area, and we were at a height of, I think, 15 or 17,000 feet, somewhere there, doing this IF profile.
So the student was under the hood, I presume.
Yes, you had the visor cover and stuff like that. And suddenly there was this grinding sound, and it was a very something very, very different and a horrible grinding sound. God. Very loud, and suddenly grinding sound stopped and everything stopped, in the sense that there was no sound, there was deathly silence in the sky.
My goodness.
And the first shock of what the sound was, and then I looked inside at the instruments and I saw my RPM was 0, my oil pressure was 0, and my jet pipe temperature was almost coming down, and it went to 0 after. Your main engine instruments, everything went to 0. And the first thing, and that's an indication that you had an engine seizure. And it's not even an engine failure where the engine is windmilling. So you had an engine seizure. So there was this deathly silence, like you were in a glider.
Wow.
And that's the situation we found ourselves in. So I took over controls from my cadet, and I told him I have the controls. And I told him we've had an engine seizure. And I started my turn back towards base. And I gave a call to the ATC to say that I've had an engine seizure. So there was this little silence for a moment, because seizure is not a word that one hears too often. It's a bit of a rarity actually in the Air Force. And so there's a little pause, silence, and then they said, confirm engine failure. I said negative, it's an engine seizure, and I'm heading back towards base. So there's a duty pilot, one of the instructors was there, always in the ATC, and he came up and he said, Mukho, what's wrong? And I told him I've had an engine seizure. He asked me, tell me what all is there in the cockpit, and I told him this was on. And what has gone off, the RPM, JPT, oil pressure, everything's gone to 0. There's no sound, nothing. So he said, okay. The emergency booklet has only one action for an engine seizure, and it's a one-word action which says eject. And I knew it, he knew it. So he told me, he says, okay, Mukho, eject.
So, sorry, if I can just pause here. I'm not sure the audience appreciates the difference between a failure and seizure and the impact of a windmilling engine versus a seized engine. So if you could just take 2 minutes to just explain that.
Right. When an engine fails, say for reasons of fuel starvation, say as an example, the engine will continue to windmill. That means it's rotating. So there is some airflow which is passing through the jet engine. And that little bit of airflow does provide some sort of forward thrust. And because of that, there is some capability, a little bit of capability of the aircraft to travel or glide to certain distances. In an engine seizure, it just stops. The engine does not windmill anymore. It is stuck. It's frozen, and that becomes like a flat plate. You put a flat plate in the airstream, and if you put a flat plate in an airstream, it's just resistance and
massive
nothing else.
drag it creates.
Absolute drag. There's nothing else and the aircraft will now just fall like a stone or whatever little capability it has. It'll go through. But what it implies is that if in a windmilling engine, which we trained for, we used to train for practice force landings with a windmilling engine, and we had a pattern which was worked out for all these aircraft to come and land in case you were close to base. So I headed for that. Now that pattern is determined by a certain rate of descent that the aircraft goes through when it has a windmilling engine. When you have a seized engine, these parameters change absolutely, where the rates of descent do not meet those of the windmilling engine anymore. And the rates of descent are far greater, far greater, I would say, than what the normal engine would give.
And I presume it's never been measured because you can't accidentally or deliberately seize an engine in flight, right?
No, you can't. So with the result, as it so happened, mine was the first ever case of a seized engine on the Kiran. And there was this 6 years service flight lieutenant in the cockpit with a cadet with a seized engine whose parameters were not known, what the aircraft is going to do, what is going to happen. So they told me get out. But the aircraft was gliding.
You were still over a built-up area, I presume, because you were over the city.
Yes, I was over the thick of town, and I was heading towards the base. And they told me get out. I said negative. I'm coming towards base. I said I've got populated area below me, the whole town is below me. And I said I'm coming towards base. And so I continued heading towards base. And I told the cadet, I said we got a seized engine. We'll have to eject. I want you to practice the ejection procedure. Because I think some of the other pilots who've spoken to you on the podcast have somebody's mentioned about the Kiran ejection system, where you got to take off the hood first, and thereafter one seat at a time. There's no command ejection, as they call it. So as a rule, and our training as instructors, you would want to get your cadet out first. You should be the last to abandon. It's like the captain being the last to abandon ship. So you would like to see your cadet go first. So I told him, I said, look, there's a procedure. You are clear about the procedure? He said, yes, sir. So I told him, practice the ejection procedure. We practiced it 4 times. Because I told him, I said, son, this has never been done before by anybody. I'm going to try and attempt to bring the aircraft back. I cannot give you a guarantee because I don't know what's going to happen a little later. So when I tell you to go, you better go fast because I can't wait too long for you. So I made him practice 4 times. He was feeling reasonably confident at the time. Of course, he was petrified. But he was feeling reasonably confident that he could hack process. And we came through this, and I realized first thing I did was lower my undercarriage. Because I said I don't have electricals, so there's a manual system, I load the wheels. So I had the wheels now. I didn't have the instruments. I was only going by my airspeed indicator and my height. Because the pitot tube gives you your airspeed and your altitude. So I had my altitude and my airspeed, and I was going purely by that.
So, what is the rate of descent in a windmilling engine versus a seized engine? What were you experiencing? What is that order of magnitude difference that you were getting?
It was a little more than double. Wow. I also started getting a lot of instructions and people talking on the RT to me. And slowly with the seized engine, other things started to fail. Other systems started to fail in the cockpit. And I finally had about 7 or 8 different things which had packed in. And the best thing that happened at the end of it all, the RT went. And I didn't have to listen to these people and their advice anymore. And I was my own boss, and it was my decision thereafter exactly what to do and what not to do. And it was a great relief for me actually when it became even more silent because now there was nobody
talking. Wow. But I believe through this, like a test pilot, you were reporting rates of descent in various configurations and all that in a very academic way.
I carried on talking right through, giving all the parameters, and when the RT failed, thereafter I started to, I told my cadet, just note down these figures.
God.
So we kept noting some figures on a paper pencil, on a pad. He kept writing a little bit. And I told him, I said, this has to go into your pocket and you get out when I have to tell you to get out. So we carried on this thing right till the approach, when I was pretty certain that I'd make it. And I had, there's a system in the Kiran where you have a one-time flap usage for landing. There's a small hydraulic accumulator which gives you a one-time operation.
Okay.
And when I was absolutely certain, more than certain that I will make the runway, I decided to select the flaps. And having selected it, I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, because now the aircraft sank at about, I think, 2.5 times its normal rate of descent, and it was now falling like a stone. And I thought I'll never make the runway. I scraped it. Actually, it was touch and go. I scraped it. I touched down about 100 feet into the runway, and I stopped within the first marker, which is this 300, 400, 500 feet or so.
Wow.
So when we came out of the aircraft, the CI had driven up the Jeep. We came out. My cadet couldn't get out. His legs were shivering. And so we took him out. And then we walked back at the aircraft, and when we went and looked at the jet pipe was one huge mass of metal, of chopped metal. It was like something that has gone through a lathe. A metal piece gone through a lathe. So there were these shavings and carvings of metal strips, and the jet pipe was full of it. The engine, actually, there are 3 bolts that hold the engine from the top, and 2 of the bolts had sheared, and the engine just sank. And it had eaten up most of the systems inside and part of the fuselage. And that's what all the metal shavings were in the jet pipe.
Amazing. My goodness.
They just told me, good show, this, that, and I was called by the CI, the commandant, everybody asked me. They asked me the routine stuff, and then they told me, good show, well done, and carry on. And I started my flying. The next day, I was flying with the cadets again, and we just carried on. When I got posted out, we were traveling by train. There were 3 of us. Rajaram, Kukreja and myself, and we were heading to Tezpo. And at Vijayawada, I remember I had gone out on the platform to get some chai in those coolers and smoke my cigarette. And I came back, and these 2 guys, one of them was inside, and he said, "Hey, Mukh, congratulations." I said, "For what?" He says, "Your name is here in the awards list," because that was the 26th of January. We were on the train at Vijayawada, traveling to Calcutta, and that's when I got the news of the award for
Amazing. Well deserved, sir. Well deserved, definitely. Did that cadet return to flying? Could he get his nerve back?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, he was doing very well. He went to Mirages.
Amazing. Okay.
MiG-21s and Mirages, and he was doing very well. He left of his own accord. As a squad leader, as a senior squad leader. He was the flight commander of the squad when he left. And he took up civil flying. We are in touch off and on, even today.
Amazing.
Just need 70, Roger, report IP southeast, connection for Sumit and field selected.
We come back to the Trisonics. What was your feeling like when you were nominated to go fly the MiG-25, and what was your first impressions? What was the aircraft like to fly? I know we only acquired the reconnaissance version, but what sorts of missions did you train for? What sort of sorties have you seen? Any interesting experiences you can tell us about? I know you did get your VSM for this fascinating work with the scientists of the Udaipur Solar Observatory for photographing the eclipse. And so just love to hear about your experiences with the Foxbat, sir.
Before that, since I guess your podcast is a free for all, I hope it's a free for all
Absolutely,
information.
sir.
My going to MiG-25s was again. I thought in my mind was a little strange because what in Pathankot I was stuck for 4 years, as I told you, in 3
right.
squadron before I went to FIS. And then, in your ACRs, there's a column which says that choice for next posting. And through the years, I was hearing people say, yeah, you give your choice, you never get your choice. Peace staff never gives you your choice of posting.
Right.
Of course, I became AOP later on, you know that.
Yes.
So there was a time when we were so frustrated, we would write anything and anything in that column of first choice and second choice of where you want to go. So, people would give aircraft type and, that or some place or whatever it is. And there was a time I remember, I think it was at AFA, where I wrote first choice to fly faster and second choice to fly even faster. Now, it was out of fun. And I'm serious about it. I actually wrote it. I don't know. Of course, it's not something that somebody would have seen and taken cognizance of. But the fact remains that I was flying even faster by 1982 years. So anyhow, as I told you, when my call came for MiG-25s, I had finished just a year in Tezpur in 8th Squadron. And I joined them in early 82, January 82. They had got back from Russia, the 6 pilots and 10 technical officers. That's what the initial group was. And they had got back sometime around between end of August and sometime in September of 1981. And they started setting up the aircraft. The Russians were there in full strength. Technical guys assembling the aircraft, which were coming in these huge AN-22 aircraft, contra-rotating 4-engine massive aircraft. Wow. They would bring these crates of MiG-25s in it. And we've had a case of AN-22 getting stuck in, his wheels getting stuck in the Kacha in Bareilly, which was a story by itself. Hopefully somebody will tell it to you sometime. And they were being set up, they were being assembled, and they were being test flown first by the Russian test pilot, and thereafter handed over to us. And that's when we would take over the aircraft. That means the initial lot of guys who would come from Russia, they would take over the aircraft, and we would start flying. So that is the stage when I joined. And as I told you, they called me the first Indian. I went through my 3 weeks of ground training in the classes. I was a sole pupil. And after 3 weeks, then my flying training started. The then Colonel Don Lazarus and as the flight commander and wing commander AJ Singh, my old instructor.
Okay. He was the first CO, correct, yes.
So that's where it started on the MiG-25, and as you're aware that we were flying our supersonic profiles, as we call them. We called everything supersonic profile. There was we never wrote down anything in particular. We were not supposed to write anything in particular. And we flew supersonic profiles in a pressure suit, which the MiG-21s and the MiG-23 MFs and all were using earlier, and which was also the suit that Yuri Gagarin actually wore in his flight in space, first time in space. Maybe a little modified for him because of the space, but it was essentially the same suit. The helmet, Gagarin's helmet would have been a little different, but we had this huge helmet with a bladder and this ring around the neck, the helmet was more than 2 kgs in weight. And this pressure suit had to be a skin fit. Because of the skin fit, it wouldn't slide onto your body, and you needed to wear silk inners. So all the old timers who have flown these aircraft, the MiG-21s, and we also trained as pilot officers also in these pressure suits. So everybody would be familiar. The newer generation hasn't experienced this, unfortunately. So you had this, you had your underwear vest, and then you had the silk inners, then you had the pressure suit, and then you had the fourth layer was a normal overall because there were so many strings
Strings,
hanging from the pressure suit that you didn't want to get it snagged on the switches and the
Right.
levers and stuff like that in the
Yeah.
cockpit. So we flew in that for the supersonic missions, which were always because the aircraft were basically designed for that, not designed for subsonic flying.
Right. And just for the audience, the aircraft was designed really to catch the SR-71, those sorts of things, isn't it?
Yes, it started as an interceptor version, the MiG-25 Alpha, and so that had the interceptor missiles, and it was basically built as an interceptor. The Reiki version came on a little later, and what they did was they fitted this massive camera size. It's like a small dining table. I would
Holy
say.
cow!
Yeah, I would say between a 4-seater and a 6-seater dining table, that's the size of the camera that was under the nose. There were 5 cameras. There were 4 oblique and 1 vertical. Then you had side panels where you had the ELINT data collection.
Okay.
It had an ELINT, very good ELINT capability also. Not very good, but I would say a pretty good ELINT capability.
Just for the audience who don't know what ELINT is, if you could just explain, sir.
Electronic intelligence. So you gather the frequencies of various radars which are transmitting.
Right.
So you collate and identify the types of radars, and so you have a threat library, I would say, within the computer base, and so all this data is collected and collated, and then if you fly a certain pattern, you can triangulate where these emissions are coming from. And then triangulate it, and thereafter get a fix on where the radar actually is. So now you've been able to identify the radar exactly, more or less on the ground.
Right. Okay.
Because of the altitude that we flew, we always flew above 20 kilometers altitude, which is about 65,000 feet. And because of the speeds and those altitudes and the distances, we had a coverage of almost 1,000 kilometers for the ELINT.
Wow.
And which was a huge thing. But the fix was not very accurate. But you got a general area, you got a general pinpoint of where the target was.
Wow.
So we could give that information to the strike pilots, and thereafter whatever intelligence could be gathered.
Okay, amazing. I don't know if you know, my father was the test pilot who first test flew it in Russia back in 79, I think, or 78. And he had it at 22 kilometers, 2.8 Mach, I think, in that sortie profile.
We were aware that Air Marshal Ramchandran had flown the MiG-25 and evaluated. Actually, the whole evaluation of the aircraft was his.
Yeah.
And so the Indian Air Force has actually bought the aircraft based on his evaluation.
Correct, yeah. So tell me about your first few sorties in that, sir.
It was, for its role, it was one of its kind. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
You cruised above 20 kilometers. Okay, let me just go through a little bit to give you an idea. When you took off, and after takeoff, you just accelerate a wee bit and then start your climb, and if you have to do a reciprocal turn, that is through 180 degrees to go on a mission. By the time you have turned through 180 degrees and come in line with the point on the runway where you took off from, you are at 30,000 feet already.
30,000 feet. Oh, wow.
So just a takeoff and a turn around, passing the point where you took off from, you're crossing 10 kilometers and you're 1.1 Mach. You've crossed 1 Mach at that
My
stage.
God.
Now, the other peculiar thing about the MiG-25, which is a little different to the other aircraft, is that on all other aircraft, we always climb is done at a constant true airspeed, TAS, with a reducing indicated airspeed.
Correct.
So as you keep climbing in a MiG-21 or a MiG-23 or a Jaguar or any aircraft, you climb at a constant TAS. With altitude and the rarefied atmosphere, the IAS keeps to reduce the indicated airspeed. And the MiG-25 was different because it was designed for this particular mission profile. So you climbed at a constant IAS.
Oh, okay.
Rather than a TAS, you climbed at a constant IAS. And because you climbed at a constant IAS, the TAS was accelerating all the time.
Right, correct.
So as you went, you saw 1,000 and you saw 1,500 and you saw 2,000 and you saw 2,500. So those are the speeds that you were looking at as you climbed. Whereas your IAS was an 800 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers dropping to 800 or 850 IAS, and we maintained 850 IAS thereafter. So you had 850 IAS on showing on your instrument, but the TAS needle has hit 2,000 and hit 2,400.
My goodness.
It hit 2,000. After 2,000, the IAS also has to increase to 1,000 and 1,050 thereafter.
Wow. And the reason for this was the IAS, of course, related to lift and density and things like that, and you want to maintain that and not stall it out. Is that why you?
You see, the aircraft also at those speeds, and as you go into rarefied atmosphere, we flew. Ganesh, we didn't fly in the troposphere like all normal aeroplanes. We flew in the stratosphere.
Wow.
The stratosphere was a whole different ball game, a different environment altogether. The sky was never blue anymore. You flew in dark gray environments, going into blackness of space. So in those rarefied environments, the aircraft was virtually operating like a ramjet. And so this huge airflow that was required to sustain the ignition in those massive engines. Each engine was, I think, if I remember correctly, 13,200 kgs. That's 13 tons each engine. Thrust from each engine, two engines. 26 tons of thrust. So yeah, it was a brute of an aeroplane. That it was just pushing through the sky. It's an immense speed.
And did you have to fly it with a great degree of planning and precision because of that size and power, that you couldn't do the carefree throwing it around maneuvering that you were probably doing with a MiG-21?
It was designed basically for photography, Ganesh. So photography needs a very steady state of flight. So the steady state of flight, and this was strategic reconnaissance.
Correct.
Now, strategic reconnaissance, unlike the tactical reconnaissance done at low levels for small area coverage, we were covering a swath, a camera coverage, or the swath as you call it, of 90 kilometers plus, a little more than 90 kilometers, and you're running straight, say 600, 800 kilometers. So 600, 800 kilometers by 90 kilometers. That's your photography swath. And that's what you did. So you had to have a steady state of flight. So this aircraft, you had an autopilot. It was the first generation autopilot. You had a navigation system called a Pelling, which was also first generation, inertial nav system. You could, after takeoff at 50 meters, say 160, 170 feet, you could actually, if you wish to, you could engage the autopilot. As your wheels went up, you could engage the autopilot, take your hands off the controls. The aircraft would accelerate to its climb speed, turn to the waypoint that has been fed into the computer earlier, execute the turn, continue up, reach its altitude. You had to operate the throttle. Because on a MiG-25, if you don't come back on the throttle at 20 kilometers of height, at 18 kilometers of height, she is continuing like a bomb. She is traveling so fast at that stage. To give you an idea, the best rate of climb of an aeroplane is achieved at sea level. A MiG-21 rate of climb at sea level is 110. The old MiG-21 FL was 110 to 130 meters per second at sea level, MiG-21, with full afterburner. The MiG-25 was crossing 20 kilometers of altitude at 100 plus meters per second.
Oh my goodness.
In rarefied atmosphere. Now that is power. That is sheer power. So at 18 kilometers or so, we would come back on the throttle to minimum. And the computer would find its level. It was designed to fly. Those people who've studied aerodynamics will understand that when you fly for range, maximum range on an aeroplane, there's a formula called little m equal to 1. She was designed to fly at little m equal to 1. So the computer would level her out. So depending on the fuel weight and the aircraft weight at that time, the aircraft would level out at 19.5, 19.7, 20.2, 20.1, settle down there.
Right.
And then as the weight started to reduce and the fuel started to, with the fuel getting consumed, she would cruise climb. That means slowly, gradually continue to climb at 1 meter, 2 meters per second. Keep climbing, which did not disturb the photography because that 1 meter rate of climb did not make any difference to the photography.
Right.
So at the end of a profile, typically, without touching anything, you would end up, because of the fuel having got consumed, end up at about 22 kilometers or 23 kilometers sometimes. But she was a gas guzzler. She was a gas guzzler. That was the biggest limitation of the aeroplane.
So what were your mission profiles like in terms of how many hours were you flying?
We had a lot of limitations, Ganesh, when we set up the squadron. The fuel and the tires were two limiting factors on the aeroplane because they were to come from Russia. The Russians did not accept Indian oil making any fuel for them.
Fascinating.
And Dunlop making the tires for them. So they said, no, you have to use the Russian fuel and the Russian tires. So it was like blackmail, I would say. The fuel, you would also understand that at those speeds, notwithstanding the fact that the ambient temperature of the atmosphere is about minus 85 to minus 90 to minus 95 degrees, depending on the altitude. The skin temperatures, because of the speed at which you're transiting, the skin temperature rises to 300 degrees Celsius, plus 300 degrees Celsius. So they always told you to wear full sleeves and not touch the sides of the aircraft because it would be hot. Skin temperatures are very high. Because skin temperatures are very high and your fuel tanks are in the wings and in the fuselage and all that, you could not use the same fuel that all the other aircraft use. So your aviation turbine fuel, the ATF that all aircraft use, has a nomenclature called K50. The MiG-25 used a fuel which was called K60, which essentially meant a higher specific gravity. So the K50 fuel has a specific gravity of 0.77 and the K60 fuel had a specific gravity of 0.84. And what the higher specific gravity actually gives you is a higher flash point of the fuel. So with the heat, the fuel will not burst into flames and it does not get ignited at any time because of higher skin temperatures. That was the reason for the fuel.
Understood.
With the Gulf War going on, the Iran-Iraq war going on, and the Suez getting roughed up in the bargain, our fuel used to come by ship across the Cape of Good Hope. So the fuel would take 3 months to come. So we had these storage tanks and stuff like that, but if you're consuming, almost 20 tons of fuel per sortie, the storage tanks couldn't take so much that you could fly endlessly as much as you wished. So we were limited and we were stuck sometimes for a couple of months where we didn't fly at all because there was no fuel.
Wow.
The same thing with tires. And the tires, they refused to accept Dunlop making the tires. And it took a few years. It took quite a few years. Right through my first 4 years in the squadron, I don't recollect us getting fuel from Indian Oil. But when I came back as a CO later on, we had Indian Oil fuel and we had Dunlop tires.
Wow.
Yes.
Roger, report IP southeast, Greenwich, for Sumit Mukherji.
Tell us about any, what sorts of missions, you said strategic reconnaissance, so I presume you're going over areas where most other aircraft wouldn't go in normal times.
Yes, before that, point out a couple of things. which I don't know whether you would believe it or whether other people would believe it. If someone said that he didn't feel fear in that sort of an environment, I would say that he's telling lies. We've all flown fighters. We've all flown all sorts of daring stuff and done all sorts of daring things. But it was eerie to fly in that sort of environment. Where everything is dark. You have your cockpit lights on for night flying, and you're flying at that altitude, alone, quiet, all silence all around you. You're not talking to anybody.
Right.
But the fear was, Ganesh, was that you're sitting on a fuel tank. You're sitting on 20 tons of fuel.
20 tons.
And God forbid the fire warning light came on. And the fire warning light means that it's your fire and it may just blow up at any time. You don't know whether it's going to blow up or not. Ejection. Now the ejection seat on the MiG-25, the good Russians had kept the ejection seat the same as the MiG-21 and the MiG-23. So you had two settings on it, which was a 3-kilometer parachute setting and a 6-kilometer parachute opening setting. So we had set it to 6 kilometers. But if you're flying at 22 kilometers of height and you have to eject at that altitude, you have a free fall of 22 kilometers to
6.
Take 20 kilometers. 20 to 6, 14 kilometers of free fall in temperatures, ambient temperatures of minus 80, in a pressure suit, of course, but you don't know, that was an absolute unknown. And that was the fear, I think, that at least I felt, and I'm sure a lot of people felt, that you're going to have a free fall. You're going to hit terminal velocity. And I don't know when the parachute opens, will it take that opening shock of that velocity of fall.
Wow.
That was the only thing that I think really sort of perturbed us in any way. But apart from that, it was different. Flying missions, operational missions, there were very few and far between. We still don't talk about it. There are some things which are still kept within the constraints of secrecy.
But did the aircraft kind of fulfill the purpose that we had bought it for?
Yes. Some of the pilots have flown those missions, some have not. Some have flown partially. We did other missions also to activate the air defense systems, to check their efficacy. Right. You penetrated and you exited with the knowledge and the hope and the surety that nobody will catch you. And that was, I think, our biggest trust in the aeroplane, that it had the height and the speed that nobody could catch us. It would be incorrect to say that we were not interceptable. We were interceptable, provided you knew we were coming. We would move into our forward bases like Adampur or Jodhpur or Jamnagar and operate out of there. So we would fly into it as a normal, in our subsonic method, quietly like any other aeroplane doing a ferry. And your takeoff would be when normal flying is going on. And then the radars would be seeing so many blips on the radar screen, and then one blip would just disappear. That's how you went.
Okay.
And everything was radio silence. We operated in silence all the time. You just asked for takeoff. In a normal sortie, in an operational mission, you just told the ATC, at this time, just keep the runway clear, I'm going. That's
amazing. And you were involved with that photographing of the eclipse. Tell us that story. So what was the preparation that went into it? What was that sortie like? Yes,
I think you've already got a part of it on an earlier podcast.
The shadow was
from
Jay. Jayavant, yes.
Yeah, Jay was my flight commander, and so you've already got a part of that. The essence of this whole solar eclipse thing was from the solar observatory in Udaipur. There was one Dr. Bhatnagar, and they requested air headquarters. So air headquarters called me. I was the CEO at the time, and they said that we want you to photograph the corona. The corona is the cloud around the sun at the time of eclipse. The properties and what happens in the corona are of great value for some reason to the scientists, which we are not too familiar or aware of. So when you photograph or picturize a corona from the ground, you have all the full atmosphere, the dust particles, the water vapor, everything, which is giving a certain amount of resistance to the lens of the camera till you actually get the picture. Their idea was that if we can photograph it from an altitude where there are no dust particles, there is no water vapor, there is nothing except clear lens and looking at the corona,
Right.
you will get more information out of the corona than you can get otherwise. The add-on or the incidental was photographing the shadow, which they said would be traveling along the ground. And they said that you will chase the shadow. Actually, we didn't chase the shadow. When we asked them the speed of the shadow was traveling at almost 3 times the speed of the aircraft.
Okay, wow.
It travels at more than 5 miles. We fed into the shadow actually,
Understood.
into the path of the shadow. So we timed it so that we fed into the path of the eclipse, and the shadow came, engulfed us, and overtook us.
Okay.
That was how the shadow moved. As far as the aircraft photography was concerned, it had to be a frontal photography. Now, with our belly cameras, there was no possibility of doing this. So, when they told me this eclipse thing in the air headquarters, I said, I hope everybody understands that I have belly cameras. So they said, no, sir, we'll fit a camera in the cockpit, and then you photograph it from the cockpit. I said, okay, that's fine, we can do that. So we took on the task. Air headquarters took on the task, and Dr. Bhatnagar and his team moved into Bareilly. We started planning as to what we were supposed to do. So he said, I said, Dr. Bhatnagar, can I have your camera? So he said, yes, group captain, it's coming. It took about a week to come. Now they had all these NASA charts and various stuff that they had to get the exact position of the sun, the moon, and the atmospheric conditions which would accrue on that particular day and the days preceding. So the weather, all sorts of stuff, information that they had, scientific information. Now when the camera came, I don't know, you have a laptop with you, I'm sure,
Yes.
Ganesh, a 12 or a 14-inch or a 15-inch laptop. It will say a 12-inch laptop and about 8 inches in height.
Oh boy.
Now that was the size of the camera. Now till then I had not taken him to the aircraft. When he came with this camera, it came in this huge carton. And when it came in this huge carton, I asked him, I said, what is this? So he said, this is the camera. So when he took it out, I said, Dr. Bhatnagar, have you seen what a fighter cockpit looks like? He said, no. And I took him to the aircraft for the first time. And he climbed the ladder and he said, oh my God. So he said, this camera cannot fit. I said, yes, it cannot fit. There was this huge problem as to how to fit the camera. But we had these fantastic technical officers with us. And we knew that if we had to start asking permission from air headquarters and from HAL and all that to do modifications, it would never happen. So we kept it quiet. We did everything on the quiet. Just the AOC was in the picture. And we moved that instrument. There's a combing on the instrument panel, which gives a shade to the instruments. We had to modify that combing, and then how to align the camera. The camera alignment. You see, when we align guns on a fighter, we have a system of putting it up on jacks and then focusing the cameras onto a target, onto a particular apparatus in front, on which we sort of get all the guns sort of harmonized, as we call it. So I had to do a harmonizing of the camera with the rigging of this aeroplane. That means the way it is going to fly. So we mathematically had to work out the angle of attack of the aircraft, and we took help from all these people and all their knowledge of physics and maths and the atmospheric conditions that would happen on that day. Then we put the aircraft on jacks on the ground, and we fitted this structure in front which we created, fitted the camera, then aligned the camera, tightened the screws and bolts and stuff like that. And this took a lot of doing. It was not, it didn't happen in a day or two. It took about a week or more. So all this was going on. We had good lead time, so we were working on it constantly. And then we realized when we were talking that when you're filming the sun, and as it goes into the eclipse and it goes fully dark, the sun will disappear, and I will not have any alignment as to where to point the camera.
Right.
So we fabricated a gun sight
Oh.
on an aircraft which was not designed to have one, with a small metal listing, and I used, remember the good old graph sheets that we used in our drawings in our maths and physics? So a graph sheet, a centimeter graph sheet, a 2 centimeter square graph sheet I took. I pasted it on that, I fabricated a gun sight and fitted it on the side of the camera. And at the apex of the center of the origin of the 4 squares, I pierced it with a pin. So because you couldn't be looking at the sun at that time, my ability to follow the sun was now through that gun sight and looking through that pinhole and following the sun through that pinhole. And thereafter in blackness, just maintaining my height and speed accurately as far as possible till as long as I could. So we flew this mission. It finally worked out to about almost 80,000 feet, I remember. We flew at 2.5 Mach. It was a successful mission.
Fantastic. Wow.
The people on the ground, there was a place called Neem Ka Thana near Lucknow, which was identified as the center point of the travel of the eclipse. The people on ground with their telescopes at Neem Ka Thana, all the scientists were there. At Neem Ka Thana, they could see the eclipse for a total time of 42 seconds. When flying at 2.5 Mach at those altitudes and in the direction of the eclipse, running along with the direction of the eclipse, we photographed it for 2 minutes and 20 seconds,
nice.
21 seconds, 22 seconds. Yes. And it was a Hasselblad camera, which was taking, it was not a video camera, it was a Hasselblad camera, which was running at 25 frames per second. Because of this, you see the camera, this huge block of camera obstructing the front of the cockpit. There was no way we could have used it in the fighter, the single-seater aircraft. So we flew the trainer for this mission, the 2-seater. So the camera was fitted in the front cockpit, which was the instructor's cockpit actually, but my deputy flight commander, that time called a Babu, sat there with the camera, and I was flying there with the gun sight at the back on flying the height and speed and doing that thing accurately. He was clicking away on the times given to us by the scientists, and the camera was being operated from there, and I was flying the aircraft with the gun sight and the fabrication that done.
Wow. Thank you so much, sir. That's just a fantastic description.
And Jay was 2 minutes behind us.
2 minutes behind.
Jay had fed in behind us with his belly cameras and filming the shadow.
So, sir, changing gears a little bit, the MiG-25 I know is not the most maneuverable of fighter aircraft, but you've also had extensive experience with the MiG-29 and commanded a squadron of it. So what was it like to fly the Fulcrum? When did you transition to the Fulcrum? What was your experience flying that aircraft?
The Fulcrum was a dream come true, actually. I think with the Mirages having come in and MiG-29s that came in 2 years later, I think everybody was looking to get into the latest aircraft, and the fantastic maneuvering capabilities that these aircraft had was something that one really wanted to sort of feel and live it. Actually, you got to live and be in that cockpit to feel exactly what it means to maneuver the way that aircraft can perform. So I was in TAG D as an instructor at the time when my posting came. initially it came as an attachment to the squadron to do my conversion because I was not qualified at the time. This was 1990. So they had come in 1987 with Harish Masan. And they had established for almost 3 years by then. And so I did my initial conversion, went back to Type T, and then a little later, maybe a week or 10 days later, my posting signal came out as the commanding officer of 47 Squadron Black Archers. So I served in that appointment for 2 years. Beautiful place, Pune. Unfortunately, 200 days out of 365 in both the years, we stayed in the desert in Jaisalmer and in Uttarlai. So we were on op location most of the time. And I think we did most of our flying from there. But it was, as you asked, it was a dream come true. It was an aeroplane which was something fantastic. And some really great seat of the pants flying. And Harish sir has spoken to you. He's talked a lot about MiG-29. I don't need to talk about it. And watching his displays before that had given us all that incentive, and I was really looking forward to it. And it was absolutely fantastic flying the aeroplane.
Any memorable sorties you can recount? And
I did have, I flew with 3 chiefs of air staff of different air forces. And I flew with the Singapore air chief, who was maybe just a couple of years elder to me. They're very young in their air force. And he wanted to just pull 9G. And,
what was his background? What had he flown?
He was an F-16. He was an F-16 pilot. And Malaysia had the MiG-29s. So they wanted to, he just wanted to see performance. So he was really hauling the pole as we say in fighter parlance. I flew the Luftwaffe air chief on their visit to India. And thereafter I had the opportunity to fly Sir Peter Harding, who was the Royal Air Force chief in Gwalior. He'd come to visit Gwalior. The Mirages were being shown, and the Indian Air Force had taken him there. And I suddenly got this call. We were operating out of Jamnagar. We'd gone there for air-to-air firing. And I got this call to say that, do you have 2 trainers? I said, yes. They said, bring the 2 trainers and get into Gwalior immediately. We're going to fly the Royal Air Force chief. So we flew into Gwalior with 2 trainers, and I got to fly Sir Peter Harding, a 6 feet 4 inch huge gentleman. And right at the outset, he told me, he said, son, I have a problem. I have a neck problem, a spondylitis, a severe neck problem. So I can't. Now this I was told this before he came, that he cannot exceed 2.5 G.
Oh boy.
So I said, then why does he want to fly the MiG-29? So he said, no, he wants to fly the MiG-29. So you go there. So I went. So he tells me, he says, son, I cannot pull more than 2.5 G. So I said, okay, sir, not a problem. But before that, I had done 2 practices of what I would do and show him. And I had flown with the coup at Gwalior, later Air Marshal Rane. And I told Rane, I said, I'm going to do a loop at 2.5 G. Because the air chief must get to do some aerobatics. So I practiced a loop at 2.5 G on the MiG-29. So when the air chief came, and I said, okay, we'll do as you wish, whatever you want to do. What I really, you feel proud about a pilot when you see people at that stage of life, at that stage of seniority. I started briefing him for the sortie Ganesh. And I told him, I said, this is how the MiG-29 takes off. And this is the complication of takeoff when you engage full power and you roll. The intakes which are blanked off open up at a certain speed. At 200 kilometers per hour, they open up. And then the nose wheel is raised, and at so and so speed you take off. So, and I told him, I said, things will happen very rapidly on takeoff. So you will be following me on controls. The moment I told him you will be following me on controls, He put his hand up and he said, "Son, stop." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You know, son, this is going to be the 123rd type of aeroplane I will fly in my life. So, would you mind if I did the takeoff and the landing?" So you have to give sheer
Right.
respect to someone of that caliber. And I said, "Yes, sir." And Ganesh, I don't know, you may have interviewed some instructors. You know about patter that a qualified instructor
Yes, of
gives,
course.
when teaching
Yeah.
a pupil. We have a thing called
Yeah.
patter. He was a hardcore instructor in his time, chief. On an unfamiliar aeroplane, on a MiG-29, after listening to the briefing, he and him flying the aircraft, him doing the takeoff with me following in controls for safety, he gave me patter better than a lot of our pilots could have
Holy
given me.
cow. And this is
Brilliant.
just from one briefing and
Absolutely
taking some
brilliant.
notes and wow,
Yes.
amazing.
And then we flew, and I told him, I said, "Sir, can I show you a stall and recovery?" He said, "Son, is that safe in a fighter aircraft?" I said, "Absolutely." So, and I was told that you are not to fool around with the chief. No funny maneuvers.
No tail
Nothing.
slide.
Just let him fly around and, sort of sightseeing
Right.
trip. And he said, "Yes, I'd love to see a stall." So I showed him a stall and recovery, which is a fantastic maneuver as far as the MiG-29 is concerned. You don't lose any height, barely 50 meters or so. So when we finished the stall and recovery, he said, "Is that all? Is it over?" I said, "That's it. You did it." And he did it himself. He said, "My God, can we do one more?" He said, "I want to do it." So he did the whole thing. He did it twice. Then I realized he's enjoying himself. And I asked him, I said, "Sir, would you like to do some aerobatics?" He said, "Son, I told you I have a limitation, on medical limitation." I said, "I understand." I said, "You can take 2.5 G?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Would you like to do a loop at 2.5 G?" He said, "It's not possible." He said, "Sir, we'll do a loop at 2.5 G." So I got down to a lower height and we did a loop at 2.5 G. He was thrilled out of his wits. And he said, "I want to do one myself." So he did one with me, helping him around. Then we came and landed. He did the landing, and with me just sort of there as a safety, and last minute whatever little additional help that is required, so that we don't touch the tail. But he did a marvelous sortie by himself, more or less.
Wow.
Coming out of the aircraft, down the ladder, he was literally shouting at his ADCs. He had 2 ADCs. Said, "I did a loop. I did a loop." And they were all looking at me, and the AOC, who would probably listen to this, Adi Gandhi, was giving me this horrified look at what have you done. But the chief was so happy. It made our day, I would say, everybody's day.
Wonderful. Amazing.
So those were some of the nice ones. And of course, we had some great flying on the MiG-29 in TAC D. When they would come, I would fly the MiG-21 and the 27 and the MiG-29 all together when they were on the course. And we did some good combat flying coordinated with the other types of aircraft.
So, sir, I'm not going to let you go that easily on that. But before that, I know, Air Marshal Masand has spoken a lot about the MiG-29 on another podcast, but one particular maneuver, I want you to tell me how you do it from a pilot's perspective, which is the tail slide, which was this amazing thing I used to watch as a child on the MiG-29. What does it involve? What does it take? And why is MiG-29 one of the few aircraft that can do it?
Well, the tail slide it's a little intricate, little tricky. You got to be a little gentle on the controls. And we had seen Harish, and I had been briefed and shown by my flight commanders when I joined the squadron. So I was actually shown and taught the maneuver by my flight commanders, who were my predecessors. I wouldn't like to demonstrate it to people normally under normal circumstances, because I didn't want people to try it on their own unless someone was really experienced and well versed. It was a maneuver that required a little soft handling. I would say very soft handling. As you went into the vertical and you came back on the power, And you just sort of held that to see the smoke coming out from the intakes in front of you, along the cockpit, because now the airflow was going in the wrong direction.
Right.
It was an amazing sight. One never sees it in any other aeroplane. You see the smoke coming out on the sides of the cockpit from the intakes.
And then the controls reverse at that point. So to drop the nose, you're actually pulling the stick, is what I'm told. Is that right?
Yes, you got to play around with it a little bit. You got to pull it a bit, and then as it sort of eases out of it, because you don't want to extend the tail slide for too long. Firstly, you don't do it at too much of an altitude. You have to come down a little bit, and so you don't have too much of altitude to play around with. And that's why we didn't want to allow everybody to try and do it.
Right.
And it wasn't really a combat maneuver that one would want to do. It's just a performance issue, and you're trying to hit the edges of the envelope. So it was playing around with the stick, easing the stick back a little bit, getting the airflow to work on the tail plane, and thereafter, as the nose started to drop, to ease it down.
Wow.
And thereafter, she was very smooth right through. I mean, there was no judder or any sort of conditions of stall as one would feel on any other aeroplane that you felt on a MiG-29.
Okay. Wow.
Very forgiving.
Visual to before just 70, Roger, report back to southeast, connection for Midway, and field selected.
Shifting gears to TACD, so you commanded TACD, which is India's top gun school, the Tactics and Combat Development Establishment. So tell us something about TACD. So what does it do as an establishment? Does it run courses? Does it develop new tactics? And what was your tenure there like? What are some exciting experiences that you had while you were there?
Right, Ganesh. I had 2 tenures in TACD. One as an instructor with later Air Marshal Ajit Bhavnani as the commandant. In that tenure, we introduced the MFC course, the Master Fighter Controller course.
Okay.
That was the new add-on into the FCL course, and also the FSL course. The FSL course, earlier it was just the FCL, the Fighter Combat Leader. Then we introduced the Fighter Strike Leader and the Master Fighter Controller.
So if you can, just for the sake of the audience, explain what are these roles and therefore what are these courses?
So TACD, basically Tactics and Air Combat Development Establishment, started in Adhampur in 1971, 1st of February, set up in Adhampur as the TCDTS, Tactics and Combat Development Training School. And TCDTS graduated into what later became TACD. TCDTS from Adhampur moved into Ambala for the 71 war. They have done some stellar work in the 71 war. I think in the history of air warfare, nobody has done single aircraft fighter missions at low level, at treetop level, single aircraft in MiGs and Sukhois, which were done by the TACD pilots. And there were a close group of pilots. A lot of them became air marshals like Patni and Nadkarni, Deshpande, Ben Brar, and Mac Basra. You've known all these names.
Yes.
They were all part of that team which were doing these single aircraft strike missions over Sargodha and over Rafiki and over Chaklala and all these bases in the 71 war, and which kept the Pakis awake throughout the night because these guys were operating single aircraft out of the dark. They would come at low level, below radar cover, and they did some stellar work. So that was the origins of TACD. And then TACD moved into Jamnagar and set up as the Tactics and Air Combat Development Establishment with Wing Commander Sridharan as the first commandant as such of TACD. Wing Commander Mukherji was the first CEO of TCDTS. But when TACD was created, it was Wing Commander Sridharan as the first commandant of TACD, followed by Group Captain S.K. Mehra, who later became the chief, and then Air Marshal Mini Bawa, who actually designed the crest and gave the motto, which is Tejas Tejasvi Namaham, which means that I am the glory of the glorious.
Wow.
So you were teaching the best of the best. You were the best of the best. And you're teaching all the best fighter pilots in the country for them to go into the field and teach some more to the youngsters. That was the role of TACD. that you select people highly recommended by the units because it's a tough course to execute. And then you train them to go out back into the field and train the pilots for war. So it was a place where you taught warfare or air combat warfare. And this is passed down to the field. And all the tactics that are created for the different types of weapons that come, the different types of airplane that come into the Air Force, they're all evaluated. They come through the test pilots, of course, for all the weapon releases and stuff like that. And then those weapon performances are translated and they come to TAC D and they fly in TAC D. Those aeroplanes, the new aeroplanes that come with the new weapon systems, and those are evaluated against what is existing and what is the future. And then we say that because the enemy is also going to acquire these systems, what tactics do we take to avoid getting hit by something and to take an offensive action against such systems that are there across the border. So that was the basic essence of TAC D.
So if I'm a squadron pilot, fully ops on, say, MiG-29, and then I'm nominated to come to FCL, what would I learn differently at FCL that I wouldn't have learned in my operational conversion and that I'm then expected to go back and teach?
As you would expect, with the 3 month, sometimes 3 months, sometimes 5 month course, they also went to 5 month courses. You couldn't train everybody to be a fighter combat leader. So there were selected people who were nominated to undergo the course. And the squadrons had to select somebody who they felt was capable, who could hack the course, because TAC D was a place where they put you through the mill as far as your flying ability was concerned, your mental ability was concerned, in a difficult situation. In the most tough states of flight, and under high G and under very strenuous combat conditions, your ability to think and apply yourself is what TAC D was all about. So the people who came to do the course were generally always the above average guys in the squadron. So there were unfortunately some very good pilots who got left out and who never managed to do the course, who were highly capable. And I'm sure they would have done well. But it was circumstantial that they couldn't. The other limitation was that TAC D had only the MiG-21s, 2 variants, and then the MiG-27 came in. So people who were not qualified on these 2 aeroplanes could not participate. Till a much later date, when we started conducting courses on other types of aeroplanes, which permitted those aircraft to come and form part of the flight line. Those aircraft used to be parked there and then they would fly, and that became the norm thereafter, and which is continuing. But during my time, what I introduced as Commandant specifically was the helicopter combat leader, the HCL course. So we introduced the HCL course in my tenure, and I have flown a lot on the Mi-25 and the Mi-35 and done some of the most frightening 1 versus 1s with the rotor blades so close to each other, doing combat with another aircraft, another helicopter. And we would fly as instructor from TAC D, we would fly in the helicopter. And also sometimes in the fighters when we did the fighter versus helicopter missions.
Wow.
So to see and work out what would be the best tactics for the helicopters to follow under the circumstances. And in fact, Ganesh, the badge that the HCL wears today on his overalls were designed by me.
Yeah, so when one reads about combat and things like that, it's always exploit the strengths of your aircraft and the weaknesses of the other aircraft. And I was always wondering, where is that body of knowledge in the Air Force? And I guess what you're telling me is TAC D is that place where that development of new tactics, assessment of your capabilities, enemy capabilities, and developing strategies, and then disseminating that throughout the service, that happens at TAC D.
Yes. In fact, over years, there are many people like Air Marshal Gandhi for one. I've also done my bit in this. We've all written these huge documents as to what TAC D should be all about. Actually, the test pilots and TACD should all be together. That's when you get the best out of both worlds. That means you have a composite, the testing, the evaluation that is happening, and thereafter the further combat evaluation on the other side, all being done together. Here you're separated between Bangalore and Jamnagar, and now Gwalior. So, things move up and down. So we would get test pilots to come and help out with TACD and, tell us certain issues. And because you're flying the aeroplane at the limits of the envelope virtually in TACD. And the only other people who fly those envelope parameters are the test pilots. So we had to be in close liaison. We had to know what the limit was and not cross it at any time.
But I guess, what TACD is doing is now how do you exploit this from within that envelope? I guess that's the focus.
Yes. And TACD today has expanded so much. You have the transport aircraft there, and you have the helicopters, and you have the strike aircraft of different types and different types of airplanes coming. And you have the Red Force and the Blue Force now created, it's become huge. It's become a red flag, as the Americans have their red flag. Today, our TACD course is virtually that. They're doing a marvelous job right now.
So, sir, we are almost at the end of our interview, but I have to ask you about that photograph you sent me with all the different types of MiGs lined up. What were the circumstances of that photograph, as well as the significance to your particular career?
I had this strange opportunity that the MiG-25s were sent on one of these missions from Jodhpur to penetrate through, activate the air defense, and land at Jamnagar. So I was in the office when somebody told me a MiG-25 has landed, and I have always had this thing in me that if I'm on a base where any of my old squadrons come, I always take this carton of jalebis for the name of my old unit. So I quickly told my chaps, I said, get me jalebis or whatever snacks there are, put in a carton. I got into my jeep and I went there. So I asked the pilot, I said, you guys on the usual listing? They said yes. So suddenly it struck me that we were doing the ASF phase at that time, and the MiG-29 was there. So I had the MiG-21, I had the MiG-23U, which was the trainer. I had the MiG-25, the MiG-27, and the MiG-29 all there in Jamnagar.
Wow.
So I rushed to the AOC and I told him, I said, sir, this is an opportunity of a lifetime to photograph all of them together, and I have commanded all. So I need to get this photo done. So we got all these aircraft on the tarmac, and it was again a photo finish, I would say, because the sun was setting when this photograph was done. This lineup behind me and me standing.
It's a lovely photograph, and I'll share it with all the audience. Yeah.
I was lucky that I got to command 3 units, and I got to command all these aircraft. I was just fortunate.
Amazing. Just want to thank you for your service. Thank you for just the fantastic experiences you've shared with me today. It's been a delight to speak to you, and so grateful for all the time and in such great detail, so patiently you've explained all this to me.
Thank you, Ganesh, for the opportunity and the privilege. Thank you very much.
Just 70, Roger, report diving southeast, connection for Sumit Wave and field selected.
Well, folks, that's all we have time for this week. Join us again next week. In the meantime, sign up for updates at blueskiespodcast.com. There you'll find links to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can also write to us with your comments, questions, suggestions, and feedback from the website or to blueskies@prganapati.com. Subscribe to the podcast on any podcasting platform such as Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and even on YouTube. If you like what you heard, share it with your friends, give us a rating in your favorite podcasting app, and write us a review. It will help other people find us. I want to give my thanks to Saurav Chordia for our logo and Prithvik for the music. I want to reiterate that all the views expressed here are personal, and this podcast has not been approved by or reviewed by the Air Force, Ministry of Defense, or any branch of the government. In the meantime, stay safe and Jai Hind.